Morning, no.
We are at Daf Mem Zayin Amud Beis just after the Mishnah. Yesterday, we saw the Mishnah introduce to us again, but here primarily, the concept of Hatmana. As we saw earlier, the Gemara and Rashi explained that you're only allowed to do Hatmana, which is insulation, in something that will insulate but will not conduct heat and increase the heat, or have something that can provide its own heat back to the pot you're insulating. But if you take food off of a stove and you put it into something, even if it's not hot, for sure you can't put it into coals and to something that is actually producing heat. But even something that is currently cold, but you put it in, and the heat from the pot is going to heat whatever you're insulating in, and that will regenerate that heat. You're not allowed to do hatmana that way. That's a davar hamosif hevel. It's adding warmth or heat or steam. But you may do hatmana beforehand in a davar she'ena mosif hevel. Friday afternoon before Shabbos, you take something off, you put it on the stove, and you put it into something that's a davar she'ena mosif hevel. That is going to be permissible. And the Mishnah gives us a list of things. One list of whether they're wet or dry provide mosif hevel, they add or conduct heat. And then a list of things that only when they're wet will be mosif hevel, but when they're cold, when they're dry, will not be a mosif hevel. The Gemara asks, in the list it includes gefes, which we translated as olive sediment or grape sediment. In our Mishnah, it says zagin, which is going to be specifically grape seeds. So that's going to be the grape sediment. So gefes is going to be olive sediment. Well, what about sesame sediment, which is also from a press? Ibaylu gefes shel zeisim tanan. Is it specifically olive press sediment? Avol the shumshamin, but of sesame shaper dummy that you may use in insulating your pot. Odilmo, perhaps the shumshamin tanan, which talk about sesame, even sesame sediment. The kol shekain the zeisim, and for sure also olive sediment from the press would be prohibited to be used as your insulation, because that's going to increase the heat. Tashama, so come in here. The Amar Rabbi Zera Mishum Chad B'Davei Rabbi Yanai. Rabbi Zera said in the name of someone from the Academy of Rabbi Yanai, Kupa Shetomam Ba Asal Anich Al Gefa Shel Zeisim. That even the box that you put your insulation in, and then you put the pot in. So you have a box, an insulated box with a hot pot in it. You can't take that and put it on top of olive sediment, because the olive sediment themselves from, Eric, we are on Mem Zayin Amud Beis. We are on 47b, just after the Mishnah, right at the bottom. So we're talking about the olive sediment as it's being milled and pressed, it produces its own heat, and you can't take this box that's insulating, that has an insulated pot in it, and put it on top of the grape sediment. So you see in our Mishnah, what we're talking about and referring to is the olive sediment, but of sesame, of shumshamin, that would not be included. So Gemara says no. Really, what I would tell you is that as far as the insulation itself, even sesame sediment from the pulp from the press is going to be prohibited, because that too will conduct heat and will increase the heat, and you can't use that as the insulator. However, and now we go to Mem Chesam and Aleph. However, giving off its own heat, that you can't put an already insulated box on top of, and it'll give off its own heat, that only grape pulp, grape sediment, it's true for. It's not true in regards to shumser. So that's why Rabbi Zera said that you can't put the box on top of olive pulp, but and that's not true for sesame. However, in the Mishnah, when it says gefes, it means both. It means as far as the insulator goes, you cannot use insulation from grape sediment, and you cannot use insulation from the pulp of sesame oil. Rabbi and Rabbi Zera iklu be'Reish Galusa. Rabbi and Rabbi Zera came to the house of the Reish Galusa one Shabbos. They were there. Chaziu lahu avda. They saw a servant. The anach kuza de maya puma de kumkama. You saw that he took a jug of water and put it on top of the hot water urn. Nazir Rabba. So Rabba got upset at him and said, "Don't do that." Tried to stop him. Amar le Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Zera said to him, "How is it any different than putting a hot water pot, a kettle on top of a kettle on top of an urn? Well, how is this jug any different?" In other words, the servant put cold water jug on top of the hot water urn, and he asked them, "How is that any different than putting a hot water urn on a hot water kettle on top of the urn?" Amalei hasam akumika maikim. So I said, it's clear. There you're only maintaining the heat because it's already a hot urn and a hot kettle, and you're putting that on top of a hot water urn that will maintain its heat. It's not really going to heat it up, and it's already hot. However, here he's creating a new heat. Now it's interesting in halacha there's a concept, and we'll see this in regards to cooking on Shabbos. It's something that's already been cooked. Ein bishul achar bishul. There's no such thing as recooking something. You can reheat something, but the process of cooking really transforms the cooked item from one state to another state and really cannot be reverted back. And so once it's cooked, it's forever a cooked item, and you could just reheat it. And therefore, in certain states, in certain manners, you're allowed to reheat on Shabbos. Water, however, even though that it would lose some of its components when you heat it, but essentially goes back to being room temperature water or cold water. And so at least in water and in halacha, it could be any liquids. There is the concept of bishul acha bishul, reheating it. And we see over here, he's saying that even though that in general, there may be a concept of ein bishul acha bishul, but over here, he's creating a new cooking, whether this water was preheated or not. Because otherwise, Rabbi Zera could have said, how do you know that this water hasn't been heated before? Maybe it's been cooked before. But he didn't say that because this water, once it's cooled down, it's as if you're reheating it from the start.
I'm confused what the tzur is.
Hadar Chazi, so the Gemara goes on with the story.
Can you hear me?
Sorry? Michael, you talking?
Yeah.
Did you say something, Michael? I don't hear you.
Yes.
I don't hear you.
Yeah, this happened before. You have this set on not to hear me.
I got you now. Okay.
I think you hear me now.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'm not clear about what the tzur is. I'm imagining like an urn, like we have, at Kessler you have an urn, right? And then you have a little teapot that's on top of that urn. So it's really on the lid. It's not directly coming into contact with the steam coming up from the hot water in the urn, but that heat's being transferred. I'm wondering if the lid is the lid a kli sheni, or is that considered a part of the kli rishon?
Well, they obviously cooked differently. They had it on a fire. directly. And we'll see this Mishnah of Mecham is on Daf Nun Aleph, and whether we're talking about that it has a cover or not. You're asking it once if it has a lid. Does that define it as a second vessel? No, the lid's a part of the pot.
Mm-hmm.
The lid's a part of the pot, and you're putting it on top of that lid.
So it doesn't matter that there's a barrier between the steam, which is what the heat source would be for that pot, or not.
Well, you also have a barrier in the pot itself, right? The pot is a barrier. If you're looking at the container of the heat as a barrier, so then your pot is also a barrier.
We already saw that you could put it next to the pot to lafigas. That's it.
No, that's next to a heat source itself. You're putting it next to the oven, next to the stove.
So you couldn't do it next to a pot?
No, for sure, next to a pot. Next to a pot is going to be a lesser degree of looks like cooking. A lesser degree of cooking.
So you could
permissible. More, right? He says you can put your hot urn, your kettle on the urn on Shabbos because it's going to maintain its heat. But you can't put a fresh jug of cold water on the urn because it's creating heat.
Mm-hmm.
That water is cold; it's room temperature, and you're creating the heat.
But if you took the same carafe of cold water and stuck it next to the pot to kind of warm it up a little bit because it's a little too cold, then that would be okay.
Correct. You can put that even near a source of fire.
Right.
So they're in the house of the Reish Galusa, and they saw the servant put cold water on top of the hot water urn. And now, as goes on, Hadachaze the paras the studar apuma de kava. He saw that he put a head kerchief, a turban wrap, and he took the cloth and he put it on top of a jug. And then he put the bucket that he would draw from, or the cup that he would draw from this jug. He put it on top of the kerchief. So now the kerchief is wet. So now Rabbi tried to stop him. He yelled at him, "Don't do that! Don't do that!" Rabbi Zera said, "Well, what are you concerned about? What's he doing wrong?" You know what? You don't trust me? Watch. In the end, he saw that he was squeezing it out. We'll see later in the halachas of dush, threshing, that anytime you're extracting something that's absorbed in something else through a pressure process, essentially, is going to be a tolda of dush. It's going to be a subcategory of threshing. So squeezing grapes for the juices is going to be a schita. There's going to be a prohibition of squeezing. We'll see the oraisa levels. We'll see the rabbana levels. But essentially, you're not allowed to squeeze out a garment with of that's wet, because by squeezing it out, you're extracting something absorbed. That's schita. It's going to be prohibited. Sometimes it'll be on account of dush. There is also a possibility of melabein, where you're whitening. Essentially, you're cleaning the garment by squeezing out the water that's in it. So schita is going to be prohibited on a garment. And Rabbah foresaw that he's going to put this kerchief, this head kerchief, on the jug. And then he took the natla and he took the drawing cup and he put it on top of that. Essentially, this is automatically going to become wet. And he doesn't want it, and he won't want that, and he'll squeeze it out. And he tried to stop him in advance so he does not make that mistake. Amar lei, so Rabbi Zera said to him, okay, but ma'ishna miperunka, how is it different than a garment that they used to put over a barrel in order to sort of act as a cover, a mesh or a cloth that we put over an open barrel. They didn't have take off the entire top of the barrel and have a seal for that. So you put it over and maybe you take a rope, a twine around it, and you tie it this way. It remains on and protects the rest of the open barrel. And that's permissible, even though that cloth is going to eventually sag into the liquid and may become wet. And we're not concerned. That you're allowed to do. And over here with the head turban, you were concerned. Amar Leis, he responded, well, there's a big difference. Hasam lekapet elave. There, you actually don't mind that it becomes wet. And if you don't mind that it becomes wet, so you won't squeeze it out on Shabbos. Hacha, but if with a head kerchief, kapet elave. Of course, you don't want it to be wet, and you're concerned about it, and you care whether it's wet or not. And therefore, as soon as you take it off and you're finished with the work, you're using it basically as a protector of one of these vessels. But when you take it off and it's wet, you're going to squeeze it out because you want to put it back on your head, and it's wet. So back to our Mishnah. In our Mishnah, it gave a list of things that if they're dry, you're allowed to use as insulation. However, if they're wet, you're not allowed to use insulation. One of the things is mochin, basically shmatas, small pieces of cloth. So Ravada bar Masna asked Abaye, mochin shetama behen. These cloths that you used for hatmana, that you used to insulate your pot, are you allowed to move them on Shabbos? So if you remember, a few days ago we mentioned the concept that a piece of material that you intend on selling or making a garment out of is going to be prohibited to move on Shabbos. There's a muktzah when something is set aside for commerce, that you cannot use it on Shabbos in any other manner. Because in and of itself, it is set aside for commerce. You don't want to use it for just anything. So mochin were usually something that you would sell. They were pieces of cloth that either you were intended to turn into a garment by by sewing it together and making a garment out of it. Sometimes, as we'll see, we're talking about also pre-fully woven. So there are different stages, but essentially all of this was props for making a garment. And as such, you really don't want it to get dirty. You don't want to use it for anything. And typically it'd be muktzah. But since you designated it on this Shabbos and you used it for insulation, so now it's an insulation. But does that make it that it's, as soon as you take out the pot, so you have your chicken matzo ball soup for Friday night, it's really nice and hot. You want it to stay hot. You take some of these materials that you plan on using eventually to make a garment, and you wrap it in it, and you put it in the box, and then you have your chicken soup, matzo balls, delicious Friday night in honor of Shabbos. And now you have all these cloths. Are they muktzah? Do they revert back to the muktzah that it would have had beforehand or not? May you move them on Shabbos. Says, of course you can't move it. Just because he doesn't have any extra straw that he can use for insulation. And therefore he went and he used good materials and he used them as insulation. Therefore mafker, he just makes them ownerless. Of course he still wants it. He still wants to make something out of it. It'll be muktzah. And when it says lema messiah, let's prove it. In the wool garment making process, you have the shearings, and then they would flatten those shearings out and comb them out, and then they would dip them into color, into dye, and they would become these lashona shel argama. So the the three stages of this wool. If you have these, whether it's just a shearing, so it's a clump of shearings, or more developed all the way up into it's now dyed wool, and also if it's already woven into cloths, you may use for hatmana. You're allowed to use them to insulate. However, but you're not allowed to move them. And in the simple reading of this brisa, the meaning is, even though I used it that Shabbos, I may not move them on Shabbos. So you see, this concurs with Abaye's statement that even after he's used them for insulation, they're still muksim. So he said, okay, I accept your psak, but if your proof is from here, area, that's not so significant. Because a brisa can mean like this: if you insulated with it, so then for this Shabbos, you've designated it for a use, it's not going to be muksa. However, if you did not insulate with them, since you intend to make them for commerce into a garment, into something, and therefore it is, if you didn't use it, it's going to be muksa and you can't move them. Well, of course, why would I need a brisa to tell me that they're muksa? I know that these are undeveloped products. They're still just the shearings of wool. They're just or any stage of the wool. It's just a piece of material. Why would it not be muksa? It has no function. The Gemara says no. It would be perhaps it's not muksa on account of it has a function. As we know, they used to sit on the ground and lean, or sit on beds and lean, and they would use these cushions made up of stuffing, wool shearings, cloth, and therefore you could lean on it, and perhaps it has a use on Shabbos. And the answer is no. It's still muksa on account of that you intended for commerce, and therefore you set it aside. You don't want it to get damaged. Well, we're talking about these cushions. We're talking about the cloth or shmatas that they would put into a pillowcase to create this pillow. So if these cloths fell out on Shabbos, Rav Chisda allowed putting it back. And we're going to encounter something we saw a little bit, but here we're going to see some more of it. The concept of makah b'patish. Makah b'patish is one of the 39 principal categories of malacha on Shabbos, completing a vessel. The concept is makah b'patish means the banging of a hammer, which is the last hammer blow which makes finalizes an object and makes it usable. So anytime you complete the construction of a vessel or an item, that is makah b'patish. Now, even though we'll see later there's a limit to how much the prohibition of sorry, Toby, what was the question?
I was just asking that in the previous the flocking, the things that the valuable things that you wouldn't ordinarily use for hamana, when they say it's muksa, it's a muksa chisron kiss that you can't.
Yes, because you
can't move it at all.
You can't move it at all. You don't want it. You don't want to use it for anything else other than what it's intended for, because you want to be able to sell it. But over here, he actually did use it, and therefore it's going to be possibly not muktzah. Okay, back to makah b'patish. In makah b'patish, we have even though that we see that as far as boneh goes, construction, that ein binyan b'kelim, there's a limited amount of construction that will count as the prohibition of building when it comes to vessels. However, completing a vessel and making it into something is going to be the prohibition of makah b'patish, the Torah prohibition of completing an object. Well, making a pillow, when you put the stuffing back in, is going to be making a vessel. Rav Chana bar Chisda asked Rav Chisda, Matirin beisatzavar b'Shabbos. You're allowed to untie the neck area in a garment. So when you give your garment in to be laundered, the cleaner would tack a temporary sew the neck area together to maintain the structure of the garment. But you can't start by creating, if you made a tunic, a garment, and you need a place to put your head through, and you cut that hole for the head, that's prohibited on Shabbos. And you're not allowed to put the cloths, the shmatas, into the pillowcase, whether on Yontif or Shabbos. So it says you're not allowed to put it in. How can you say, Rav Chisda, that you're allowed to put it back in? So it says, no, lakashia, habachaditi, habatiki. Since we're talking about the prohibition of makeh b'patish, completing a vessel, that's the first time you're making this pillow, and you're putting in the stuffing, and you fold it up, and you close it up, and you make that pillow. Yes, that's where you've completed the vessel. But once you already have a vessel, and some of the cloth comes out, and you put it back in, that's not completing the vessel. The vessel was already there. You're just reinserting the mochin, and that's permissible. Tanya namehaching, indeed, we have a brisa like this. You're not allowed to put these shmatas into a pillow or a blanket on Yontif or Shabbos, and for sure not Shabbos. However, nashru, if they came out, machzirna, you're allowed to put them back in even b'Shabbos, and of course, I don't have to tell you, even on Yontif. Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, haposeach beisatzavar b'Shabbos chayiv chatas. Somebody who cuts open the neckline of a garment in order to make a place, essentially completing the garment. So they would make the tunic and then open a place to slide it over your head, and voila, you have a garment. So that's the final act of making this garment. So if you do so, chayiv chatas, you've transgressed the Torah prohibition on Shabbos and have to bring a chatas offering. Because of makeh b'patish, gemar melacha, you've completed the vessel. Maskefla of Kahana, so Rav Kahana challenged that, and we turn to Mem Ches Amid Beis. Ma bein zula megufas chavias. Later on, we're going to learn, towards the end of the Masechta, that if you have a barrel, and so they would have a wood barrel, and they would put a seal into onto a piece of wood and jam it in, and that became the cover of the barrel. And then you needed to open that. So you can slice off, hack off the top of the barrel, and now you have a usable barrel. So how is this different than that? There, I'm allowed to hack off the top in order to create an opening and take out the wine that's in the barrel. Whereas in the cutting off the neckline to create an opening in the garment is considered completing the garment. What's the difference? My ben zulazu. Now, Rashi says that the reason is because there, it's not a part of the barrel. I have a barrel that's open at the top. I take down another piece of wood, and I attach that. So when I'm reopening the opening that was already there, that's reopening. It's permissible. So think our canned foods. You have a solid can, and then you have another piece of metal on top that seals the opening that's already there that the food went in with. So so what Rav is saying here is you're removing something in an area, in a place that already had an opening. And that detachment, which was attached, you're detaching. That's permissible. Whereas in the garment, it was always one piece of cloth. I've sewn it into a way that as soon as I make this opening, I can now wear it as a tunic, as a garment. But the opening was always an integral part and a woven part of the garment itself. So I'm creating a new opening, and that's prohibited. Tues has a little bit of a different take on this because as far as a barrel goes, I'm not just removing the new part. So if you use a can opener on Shabbos to remove the lid of a can, you're actually cutting through and taking off the additional piece of metal that's a part of the seal. But by the barrel, you're actually hacking off a part of the wood that was once the barrel, and that would be somewhat different. And Tues asks, why is Rashi considering that just reopening? Because you're actually cutting a part that was once part of the barrel, and that would be similar to cutting the material in the to create the neckline. In any case, Rabbi says that's the distinction, and why cutting off the top of the barrel is permissible on Shabbos and not considered making a vessel, and with cutting the neckline to create a place for your head to go through the tunic and is considered completing the vessel, completing the garment, and prohibited. Rami le Rabbi Yirmiyah le Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rabbi Zera, and we're going to get into the concepts of Tumah again. Just a reminder of this concept. A vessel is only susceptible to Tumah from a primary source of Tumah. And what happens in our case, what we're going to address, is when I have multiple pieces of multiple vessels combined temporarily. So you send three garments to the laundry to be laundered, and in order to keep them together, they take a thread through all the garments and make a loop, and now your garments are together so that they won't get lost. You have a chain with several a ring with several keys on it. So that combination is really temporary. Each one's an individual vessel, separate garment, separate key, but they're only put together for the purpose of maintaining it at this point. But now they actually are together. Does that count as one or two? And the nafkamina and Tumah is going to be if the primary source touches one garment. Since a vessel cannot make another vessel tameh, well, only that one garment will be tameh, and it will not make the other garment tameh unless they're considered one, because of the launderer's thread that goes through to combine them. So Tanan we learned shalal shal kovsin, the launderer's thread that goes through to combine garments, v'shal shelish hamaftechos, and a ring for keys, v'habeged shutafer b'kilayim, and garments that are combined together in kilayim, that meaning you have 3 wool garments or 2 wool garments, and you take a linen thread to hold them together, and that has to, by halacha, be taken apart because you're not allowed to wear wool and linen. So it obviously must come apart. So these are all temporary things. Chibur l'tumah. Nevertheless, they count as one in regards to tumah, and all these vessels are really one. The rings are counted as one vessel. The 3 garments together that the launderer sewed together are counted as one garment, even though that it's a temporary link. Ad sheyas v'lahatir, unless you begin the process of untying that, and the concept is in Tumah, a maisa, an action defines the susceptibility to Tumah. We saw this concept in regards to, I have a piece of wood. If I make it into something, my action is going to define it in Tumah. I could actually, machshava intent can as well. But in order to take something out of the susceptibility to Tumah, I need an action to undo the action. So since somebody sewed these 3 garments together, something linked these keys together, I need an action, or at least the beginning of an action, to show the intent that they are separate, and once I start untying that will be enough to separate the garments, and they won't be considered one in regards to Tumah. What we see from this is not only during the laundering process, but even beyond that, it retains the link, and it becomes one even beyond that time. We have a contradiction to that. Makel she'asa yad lekardim. Somebody needs an axe, a shovel, and he needs a handle to the axe. And so he he takes a piece of wood and he jams it into the axe, and now he's got a handle to his axe, but it's just a regular piece of wood. It's a branch. It's a stick. Chibur l'tuma. In regards to tuma, that is a connection, and if one of the two parts it becomes tamei, the rest of it is also tamei. Even though a vessel cannot make another vessel tamei, and even though that a simple piece of wood is not even a receptacle, so it's not susceptible to tumah. But once you jam this piece of wood into the metal, it now is one piece. It's one vessel, and they would make each other tamei, and it's considered, even though it's a piece of wood, it's considered tumah. However, b'shas malacha, that's only while you're working with it. B'shas malacha in, only while you're working with this axe, shovel, broom, whatever it is you stuck this wood into. But if you're no longer working with it, you're done, and you put it aside, it's not going to be considered a part of it, and it goes back to being a simple piece of wood, and it's not susceptible to tumah. Amalei says no, you can't compare the two. That piece of wood, once you're done with your chopping, with your shoveling, you take that piece of wood out and you throw it back into your kindling, your firewood. It's not really meant to be a vessel. With the three garments, of course, it's meant to be individual garments. They're garments, they're vessels, for sure. They may be independently susceptible to tumah as opposed to combined as one, but they're really complete products in either way. So now that they're combined, they retain its oneness even beyond beyond the time. And in fact, I even want them to stay together after usage. Because this way, if it gets dirty, I can just send it back to the cleaner and it can wash it as one. So the next statement, we're going to have two versions. In Surah, they said this following statement in halacha in the name of Rav Chisda. In Pumbedisa, Masna Mashmeder of Kahana. And in the Academy of Pumbedisa, they said the following statement in the name of Rav Kahana. Va'amir la Mashmeder Rav, and some say it actually in the name of Rava. Mantana HaMilsa. Whose opinion is this concept that we say that anything that's connected is like it? It's one vessel. It becomes a combined thing. Anything that's attached to it is like it. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Rav, Rabbi Meir. So Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, this is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Where do we learn this? The Tanan, we learned. Beis apach, ubeis atavlin, ubeis haner shebekira, metame b'magav and metame ba'avir, divrei Rabbi Meir. Their ovens, we talked about this a little bit. They had a clay oven, and they had attachments that were made to the oven that you'd put hot water into one, hot oil to heat up in another, spices would go in another. So they had these little attachments, compartments that they would attach to the oven in order to get specific other products that you don't want to put fully into the oven. It's not a bread, it's not a food that you're cooking, but you wanted to get some of the heat so that you'd have these attachments. So these attachments, whether it's the place for oil or for spice, or these attachments that you can put on and take off, do they count as the oven or not in regards to susceptibility to tumah? Now, as you know, we talked about several times, a clay vessel is susceptible to tumah not only by touch, but also in the ear, but only on the inside and not on the outside. So if something tamei touches the outside of the earthenware vessel, is not susceptible. It doesn't make it tamei. Something comes into the inside, even just the ear space, it makes it tamei. So Rabbi Meir here says something that seems contradictory. These separate compartments to the oven are susceptible to tumah by touch, but not in the airspace. Wait. If it's a part of the oven, the Gemara is going to ask us, then it should be then it should be susceptible to tumah even in the airspace. And if it's not a part of the oven, so then even by touch, it shouldn't make it tummy. But what we do see is that by touch, if the tumah touches the oven, it makes these separate compartments tummy. And if something touches these separate compartments, the oven becomes tummy. So it's considered an attachment, according to Rabbi Meir, only for touch, not for the airspace. For Rabbi Shimon, Matayr. However, Rabbi Shimon says, no, it's a separate item, it's a separate vessel, and as such, even if the oven became tummy, the compartments don't, or vice versa. If the compartments become tummy, the oven doesn't, and a vessel can't make another vessel tummy. So Bishlam Rabbi Shimon Kasav the Lav Kakira Dami. So Rabbi Shimon, we understand his reasoning. He says, he's consistent. The compartments are not a part of the oven, and therefore, if one becomes tummy, the other does not. Elul Rabbi Meir. However, according to Rabbi Meir, Ikakira Damu Afil Bavir. Nami Litmu. If it's a part of the oven, well, let it become tummy even in the airspace, like the oven. The ilav kakira dami, and if it's not a part of the oven, so even by touch, it should not become tummy. So Gemara says, you're right. In reality, it is not a part of the oven, and as such, it does not have susceptibility to tumah. However, since people think of it as a part of the oven, the Chachamim made a gzeira and said, look, people consider it a part of the oven, it becomes tameh as one rabbinically. Even though that biblically it's not that way, rabbinically, because in people's minds it's one, it's susceptible to tameh. Now, so the Gemara says, if so, well, then why did they say only by touch? If you consider it a part of the oven, then even the airspace should become tummy. So this is a concept that comes up a lot in regards to tumah. When the Chachamim made an enactment of a tumah that's not biblical, that's not the oraisa or the rabbanan tumah, avdu rabbanan akera. The rabbanan wanted people to recognize that this was rabbinic and not the oraisa, and therefore they made one area that the tumah does not apply to. Why did they do this? As we've learned that teruma, you're not allowed to burn and waste tumah or kachim unless it became tameh. Now, if this is rabbinically tameh, meaning the vessel, the compartment is not tameh, it's only that people consider it a part of the oven, and the oven became tameh, so they think that the vessel became tameh. So Chacham said, okay, so that too you have to treat as tameh because people think of it as a part of the oven. And then what's going to happen is somebody put teruma in there, so the teruma became tameh, I must burn it. And if you burn it, you're wasting the teruma, and that's prohibited. So they made a hakera, they made a recognition, say, no, you don't have to burn that teruma, because since it's not tameh in the airspace, I now know that it's rabbinic and not the oraisa, so I'm not going to come to burn the teruma, because I'm going to recognize that the tuma that applies to the compartment is rabbinic in nature and not the oraisa, and so I'm not going to burn the teruma, because I recognize that on a biblical level, on a Torah level, this is not tameh. Tomorrow we'll continue with the concept of chibur l'tumah, and that when something is considered combined and one in regards to tumah, and then we'll get back to the Shabbos Hatmana questions.